Thank you so much, Vasudhev, and thank you, Gitika Foundation, for inviting me today. And it's always great to have people take interest in performance studies because when I began, honestly speaking, working on this period, especially on the performance studies and arena of Swadeshi era, the first question that I came across was, what is performance studies and how can you have something called performance history? That was the first question that I came across, and that is where I would like to begin today. So I think it's a great opportunity for me to uh, dwell into these avenues that what is performance. When we talk about performance, I am reminded what Richard Stechner had to say about performance studies, that performance is the art of doing what we do. So it is not necessarily that when we deal with performance studies or performance history, we are talking merely about jatra, theatre, any kind of folk performances or staged performances, proscenium. It also deals with the way we act and what we do in our daily lives. So that is one interesting aspect of performance studies that I began to look into the Swadeshi era. Uh, so to begin with, I would like to introduce everyone to the possibilities of performance studies and the wide avenue that it has opened up for social scientists to delve deeper into the process of collectivization of memory. To ease the process of understanding, I have selected the temporal and spatial zone that I specialize in, that is Swadeshi Bengal, 1905 to 1912. Uh, it was this period, in a sense, what Charles Dickens referred to as the best of times and the worst of times. Or to put it more simply, in the words of Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay, a renowned Bengali novelist and who grew up during this period, and basically his memoirs are full of details about this period that he collected from the daily diary that his father kept, who was alive during this period. He once wrote that about this era in his literary works and especially in his memoir, that এলো ঝড় এলো নতুন কাল 1905 সালের 30 আশ্বিন. He refers to this as a storm, and not just a storm, a very stormy new era, an era that he calls 30 Ashwin, October 1905, when came the partition of Bengal. Indeed, it was not just the partition of Bengal. Swadeshi era did usher a new age, the formative period of Indian nationalist movement, and the introduction of what later Shumit Sarkar, and whose work is on Swadeshi movement in Bengal, 1905 to 1908, remains a seminal work on the age. He said that this period was not just merely a formative period of Indian nationalist movement, it was the introduction of new techniques of mass contact. And I found that very interesting. What are these techniques of mass contact? If you look into that chapter from Sarkar's book, he talks of various performative aspects that were used, media that were used during the Swadeshi era. And he talks of theatre, he talks of Kathakatha, another folk form of folk practice prevalent in Kolkata and in rural Bengal. And he also talks of Jatra, fairs, the Malas, Swadeshi Utsavs, or the festivals that were held during the period. But one thing that his chapter was missing, the link, was that he kept on saying that it was a technique of mass contact, but he merely mentioned the media and not the technique, that how they were connecting with the mass. Now, why do I need to connect with the mass? That was the question that next came about when I went through this chapter. And therein comes the idea of the public sphere. End of 19th century, we have a burgeoning public sphere, people who are coming together voluntarily and they are expressing their opinion, they're debating, they're talking, and their voices are audible. They're discussing about things and discussing things about what? The ideas that the intellectuals were disseminating. Now, these intellectuals, and I mean it in a very Gramscian sense, these people now they wanted their superiority, their hegemony to be established by disseminating and making sure that the ideas were legitimized by the people, the masses. Hence the need to establish contact with the mass. But how do I do that? Now, when we are looking at the early 20th century Bengali people as such, these people are the non-literate class, if I may call them so. Non-literate meaning people who are not very interested in printed matter. We have a lot of printed matter by this time. There are newspapers, there are periodicals, books, novels, literature. But we are talking of a group of a large mass of people who are not interested in reading. Now, how do you communicate your ideas to such people? The most efficient way of communicating would be to making if you made your ideas visible, visibility, where they can look at it and they can hear it. Naturally, performative media now took a very important stand here. They became rather important for the intellectuals because this was one medium by which they could make their ideas heard and they could make it visible. So we have theatre, songs, proscenium theatre, songs of the Swadeshi era, which are being put to use by the intellectuals. But then you have to take into account the taste of the people. That what kind of entertainment, because end of the day, it remains a form of entertainment. People visit these places to be entertained. Now, if you, I mean, personally, I wouldn't like to go to a theater hall and be preached. I would like to be entertained. So you have to have a form that people connected with, they liked watching. Jatra form, a folk theatrical form in Bengal. This has been popular in Bengal since the Middle Ages, and it became popular as Krishna Jatra, a form, theatrical form, that a performative form rather, that was used to disseminate the bhakti ideals. Later, it dwelled into several other mythological themes, but mostly mythological. I mean, prior to 20th century, we mostly have mythological themed jatras. It was in this formative period of Indian nationalist movement during the Swadeshi era, we come across jatra which are dwelling into themes and topics which are not exclusively mythological or that deals with the bhakti ideals. It is going beyond. We have historical themed jatras like Poddini, Ranojiteর জীবনযজ্ঞ. We also have social themed jatras that are dealing with the social themes. And then we come across a very dubious form of jatra theme, Matri Puja. We have innumerable jatra performances by the name Matri Puja, one written by Kunjo Bihari Gangopadhyay. And we also come across Matri Puja performance by Mukundo Das. And interestingly enough, the book that was written, the text that we get of Matri Puja, written by Kunjo Bihari Gangopadhyay, it was also performed by another famous Jatrawala, rather lesser known Jatrawala of the period, though he was quite notorious, hence his popularity, Bhushan Chandra Das. He performed the Matri Puja that was written by Kunjo Bihari. Now, these had a very dubious ground. And when we are talking of Matri Puja, we come across innumerable reports of the colonial government, especially the reports by the Bengali translators and the legal remembrancers. Now, we have a group of people in the official space who are looking into the text of the performances and deciding that whether these were safe enough to be allowed to be performed. First, we have the Bengali translator who translates the entire text, and then it's the legal remembrancer office that goes through this translation and gives the verdict that which passages should be removed or whether it was fully safe to be performed, to be allowed. So we have two tightrope over which a very typical performative media of Bengal is now treading. First, the tightrope of colonial surveillance. And second, communicating and disseminating your ideas to the masses. Now, here is your technique. A technique that you have to develop whereby you can hide your resistance. You are actually resisting when you're talking about things that might go against the British Raj. And secondly, you're walking another tightrope where you have to make these ideas very interesting, presentable. In fact, this brings to my mind what was written in proscribed literature of the period, Mukti Kon Pothe. And in that book of the Jugantor Firebrand, published by the Jugantor Firebrand, in Mukti Kon Pothe, there was a chapter where they talk of prochar, dissemination. And they say that instead of speeches that the leaders, nationalist leaders are delivering, a more interesting and more effective method of reaching out to the masses would be jatra or performances. Why? Because it's almost like a doctor makes a patient take a very bitter pill by putting a sugar coating. Jatra or performance is that sugar coating. People don't want to hear about what's going wrong or what they should do, what is their duty, but you make them hear it by putting a sugar coating of performances. So that is what the intellectuals started doing, putting a sugar coat. And the sugar coat is Jatra performance. Now we come to the question, why Jatra? Like I said at the very beginning, Jatra had been popular in rural Bengal for quite some time, since the Middle Ages actually. So people had a tendency, they had a liking for this form of media. This was an assured form of entertainment for them, first of all. Secondly, with the coming of the establishment of the Pax Britannica, the British Raj, what we have is a very limited space for expressing oneself. You have a very limited space. Now you have to think about what you can say, what you can't, whether you're offending the Raj. The moment you offended the Raj, you become seditious. You come under the act of sedition. So you have to be very conscious. You're treating a very tightrope. And why do you have to be conscious? I mean, you have the freedom of speech. Actually, you don't. You are always in that bird cage where you're made to believe that you have enough space to fly, but the space is within the bird cage. And that's the space that they were given. And that brings to my mind an interesting story, once again written by Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay in one of his novel, Padochinho, set in this Swadeshi era. He talks of a zamindar who was once, their family was once very renowned in the rural region, and he talks about Lapur, the village where he was born in Birbhum district. And he talks of this zamindar, Nishikanto, who did not have that renowned position anymore. I mean, their family name was still there, but they were no longer wealthy. Instead, with the coming of the colonial technology and the colonial milieu, you have a new social order, and there is a new wealthier, prosperous class. Yet their renowned family name remains. Now, Nishikanto is living that life where he knows that people will just look up to him as the zamindar, but behind his back, they're no longer paying that respect to him. Yet, in that circumstances, he gave everything he had to this flower bed, a garden that he made in his backyard. And he was very fond of it. And he kept saying that these flowers are meant only for my Gopal and not for anyone else. Yet, there comes a time when the district magistrate, the representative of the colonial Raj, the British Raj, he comes visiting to the village and he comes across this flower bed, his garden, and he expresses a desire that he be presented with the flowers from his garden. So, messenger is sent to him. He's absolutely distressed, yet he cannot deny. Hence, he plucks these flowers that he didn't allow anyone to pluck from his garden except for his Gopal, and he gives away the flower. He's forced to because he knows that I cannot go against the Raj. But this leaves a very bitter taste in his mouth. He's not satisfied. And the next thing he does is he destroys the entire garden. He's so distressed that he destroys his entire garden. So what we realize is that the people within this bird cage, they know that this is the only space they have. And they don't try to go beyond the cage. But they're not happy. There is a seething anger within them. And they needed a space to let it out. But where to let it out? Because they knew within the bird cage, if you let it out, you will be heard. And your bird cage will be made smaller. Your space will crunch. So, how do you trust anyone? Performative spaces provided such a space where an emotional outburst, a common emotional outburst amongst the audiences made them realize that the same anger which made them shout out loud or express themselves to a particular scene or a song, the same emotion was being expressed by others. Others who had that same seething anger within themselves. Now, I'll come to that shortly. But before I go into that, I would like to talk about this, what I pointed out in my title of my paper, today's talk, that art of dissimulation, hiding. And that's why I brought in this, what I talked about, the bird cage. You had to hide. Performance is not just doing, it is also hiding. Performance actually gives you a space where you can become many selves. You have many selves. For instance, if I talk about me, if I take this very personal example, as Dr. Mimasha Pandit, I'm someone. As a daughter of my mother, I'm a completely different person. Amongst my friends, I'm again a different person, and so are all of us. We have many selves, and that is what performance allows you to do. Doing and being someone else, or rather, the way I like to put it, many selves. So, Jatra performances gave that space where within the bird cage, within that limited space, people, the masses, they could be communicated with and ideas could be disseminated to them so that they could talk about it. The notions of nationhood that the intellectuals wanted them to think about, to consider, and actually internalize. People who were afraid of the Raj, they could come to that performative space, talk about it, and their voices of people which were not considered, and let's say which were hitherto unheard, completely unheard. Now they became audible. They were talking, discussing. The performers, they were acting in an open-ended space. Now I would like to talk about a bit about the performative arena that we have in Jatra performance. It's very unlike what we have in theatrical proscenium. It is not a raised dais where the performers are performing. It is not a completely separate space with a Brechtian concept of a glass third wall. No, it's a completely open space where you're surrounded by audiences, onlookers from all the sides. There is no glass wall. You're performing in a space where you have to enter the performative arena from amongst the audiences. In that case, the line of separation between one who is performing or pretending and one who is looking at the pretension or seeing it becomes very thin. And there, the art of dissimulation or pretending to be someone else or of many selves does not remain limited to the performers alone. It extends, goes beyond amongst the audience as well. So what do we have? I'll talk about the performance of Mukundo Das, popular Jatrawala, as he was called by the colonial rulers. That is what the name is being referred to in all the colonial records. Mukundo Das performed this Matri Puja play. Matri Puja, as I was telling you, was a script written by Kunjo Bihari Gangopadhyay, and it talks about this mythological situation in heaven where heaven is overtaken by the demons. The leader of the demon is Krur John, which is very suggestive because partition came with Lord Curzon, as we know. And we have leaders of the heaven fighting back. And amongst them, we come across the name Oshini, which actually exists mythologically, yet suggestive once again because we have Oshini Kumar Datta, a famous Swadeshi leader. That is what struck very odd and hence seditious to the colonial government. Now, this script was not the one that was performed by Mukundo Das, though it shared the same name, Matri Puja. The play that he performed was never published. It's not in print. We just have an excerpt of it, which was taken, or rather, which was confiscated by the police. That is kept in the home political record department. And there we find that he is talking about a deputy magistrate is creating a situation where Indian deputy magistrate serving the colonial Raj is having a conversation with his wife, and his wife is reluctant to serve the colonial Raj. She keeps on insisting that her husband should give up the job serving the foreigners and work for the betterment of the nation. And the husband is not at all desirous to leave his job, and he hits his wife. And then comes a man who is collecting arms in the name of the nation for the purpose of the nation, and he tells this wife who is beaten up by his husband that he comes into that moment and he says that I was once myself a deputy magistrate and I gave up my job because of for the cause of my nation, for the Swadeshi. And that is how he creates this situation. It is not very suggestive, it is very direct. What Mukundo Das created was very direct. And interestingly enough, we have another review of his performance that we find in the fortnightly report. There they're saying that in Eastern Bengal and Assam, probably in Faridpur, no, sorry, in Joshore, there was a performance where he sang the song, a song that he used to extemporize. He kept on changing the song that he used in his play. And there was this particular song, Chere de Reshmi Churi Bongo Nari, where he asked the ladies of Bengal to give up using glasses, bangles made of glasses of the English. And interestingly enough, we find another record and report of this in the DCI, Director of Criminal Intelligence, where they say that the ladies who had come to watch this performance, they actually broke all their bangles. It created quite a ruckus. The police had to come in to control the situation. We find another report where after this performance in another part of Eastern Bengal and Assam, notices were put up. After Mukunda Das performed, a day after that, notices were put up in the marketplaces warning every shopkeeper who was selling English made glasses, English glass made bangles, and foreign goods. In fact, in another place in Eastern Bengal and Assam, there was a case of fire. Shops were set to fire, particularly shops that sold foreign goods. And all of this happened after Mukunda Das's performance. So now I try to sum up that why this art of dissimulation. We find people scared of the British Raj. They're scared that how they will react if I raise my voice of protest. I'm not happy with the situation, but I'm afraid to raise my voice because there will be consequences. But then I come across a space where I see I'm not the only person seething with anger. There are loads of other people with me. And not just other people with me. I actually meet people who are speaking out aloud these words of anger, these words of dissatisfaction. And I realize that this is the safe heaven within my birdcage where I can talk, where I can express. So, pretension had many layers, especially in case of Swadeshi Jatra. It was a pretension of remaining loyal, yet finding a space to express oneself, to vent out the anger that was within me. First. Second, it was a space where I could express myself because it was not just the performers who were pretending to be many selves. It was me as well, the audiences who could pretend to have many selves that they kept hidden. Now, what was the idea that emerged from this? The idea that the intellectuals were trying to disseminate was that of Swadesh. Swa meaning of oneself and Desh. Now, Desh was one word that had many layered meanings. For instance, a person residing in a village would always ask another person visiting their village from another village itself that Tumar Desh Konta, which is your Desh. So Desh had a very many layered meaning for them. It was their home, their land. Now, what was the extent of this land? That was quite unknown and rather unexplored. That was the space that they tried to use, the intellectuals tried to use in the dissemination of Jatra performances. And not just Jatra performances, but since we are talking of Jatras, one idea that they were using. And the second idea that they were using was of Attiyo Shojon. Attiyo is my kin, within kin, people I share my blood relation with. But there is another idea amongst Bengalis called Shojon. Who are Shojon? Shojon are extended social family. Social members who become a part of your family, so like an extended family. And with them, you do not share any blood relation, just a social relation. Now, that was the emotionalism that they were using within performances, particularly Jatra performances. Now, how? How they were using and disseminating the idea of Swadesh? Like I talked about Matri Puja play. Mukunda Das's Matri Puja play, it was very direct. I told you about Kunjo Bihari Gangopadhyay's Matri Puja, that was a very mythological setting, performed in a very mythological setting, yet suggestively talking about Krurjon, giving hints of Oshini, and connecting times. We have historical themed Jatra plays, Ranojita Jivan Joggo, which talked about Ranjit Singh, the Sikh king. Even there, the legal remembrancer noticed that they had introduced within the text as well as outside the text references of the times, of present times. So, temporality was being played with. First, you have the time of the text. Second, you have the time of the performance, meaning the time when it is being performed. And second, you have the historical time of contemporary time, of the present time, Swadeshi. 3 layers of time, they were playing with it. Now, playing with it is quite all right, but how could that harm or rather be seditious? It was quite all right to have different layers of time. The problem arose because of the open-endedness of the performative arena. Like I was saying, it was very difficult to make out the or separate the space of performance from that of the audience. The entire arena is performative space. But in proscenium, you have a separating space, which you lacked in Jatra performances. And how it made a problem was in Bhatpara in 1908, there was performance of a Jatra called Shujoggo. We don't find the text, it's just the excerpt of it that we find in fortnightly reports and in the reports of the Director of Criminal Intelligence, the weekly reports. And there, the police are reporting that in Bhatpara, this play, Shujoggo, it talked about fantasized historical situation where foreign merchants come to trade and then they take over a country. Very suggestive once again. And the representative of these foreign merchants is a character named Kuhok, which is once again very suggestive if you're a Bengali. Kuhok, and the character who played this, the actor who played this character Kuhok, the youth of Bhatpara beat him up day before the performance. There is a report of that. And when the police asked them that, why did you beat up this person? He's an Indian and he's just an actor. The answer that they received was, no, he's not an actor, he's Kuhok. So that is the kind of mixing of temporality and speciality that you get in performances, and particularly Jatra performances, which is very open-ended. what is developing from the ideas that were being disseminated? A resistance. People are resisting, a resistance that they were unable to show before, or rather within the colonial surveillance. Now they have a very hidden space. A hidden space where now they're writing a new transcript of resistance, a resistance that is coming through their encounter with this process of art of dissimulation. So, we have been talking about how the ideas were being disseminated and how the art of dissimulation were created a network of resistance, a hidden transcript of resistance. Now, what I would like to add here is often when we have come across works on performance studies, even today when we look into various historical works on performances, they refer to audiences as a vacuum, a space that accepts without any opinion of their own whatever is being presented to them. They do not have any say in that. On the contrary, the example of Shujogo that I referred to shows that actually the audiences always have a say. Because if you have the time of the performance, the time of the text, you also have the time of the audience. His or her time mattered because that created the worldly view, let's say the spectacle using which he watched or she watched the performance. And that always tinged whatever they saw and whatever they heard. So the process of internalization, maybe they were talking about whatever that was being given to them. They were discussing it, debating over it. But the end product that they internalized was always analyzed, always set to tune to their own personal worldly view. Now, this worldview, now, absolutely, worldview is very person specific, definitely. But beyond that, as I was talking about Shojon and Attio, it was based on your social community, a society, a space where you resided in, that together engendered or let's say colored your worldly views, set a pattern to it. So naturally, when they heard and saw these performances, debated, and then used their worldviews to set it tuned to their own worldviews, and then internalized it, we don't get one notion of nationhood anymore. Definitely, the community of emotion that was built through that realization, oh, great, I am angry and so are the other people, and I have a different separate space of myself within the birdcage. But beyond that, the internalization part added a different layer to it. So we have a notion of nationhood disseminated, and we have a notion of nationhood internalized. And in most cases, it was not the same. And therefore, what ultimately emerged, and I'm talking of Swadeshi period, since it's the formative period of the Indian national or Indian notion of nationhood, we have a many layered understanding, engagement with the notion, a nuanced nationhood. So, what I wrote in my book, Performing Nationhood, I made it a point to bring to my readers that performing nationhood was not just giving away an idea into an empty space. It was given in a space that was full of its own ideas. And when the two interacted, and I stressed on the term engaged, they developed a nuanced notion of nationhood. And emotionalism plays a very big role in this. Because, like I said, performative space was not just a separate space within the birdcage. It was also a space where they could speak and express and make themselves heard. And when you allow them to make yourself heard, naturally, you have something to add and not just soak in whatever is being given to you like a sponge. So, Jatra performances and along with it, all the other performative media that were being used in Swadeshi era. It created a space where the notion of nationhood was definitely disseminated, but was also engendered into a many-layered hue. I think I can wrap up here. Thank you. Thank you. I hope it was enjoyable. নাকিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে নাকিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে তাকই তাকই থই ত্রিমি ত্রিমি দম দম তাকই তাকই থই ত্রিমি ত্রিমি দম দম ভূত পিশাচ নাচে যোগিনী সঙ্গে ভূত পিশাচ নাচে যোগিনী সঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে দানব দলনি হয়ে উন্মাদিনী আর কি দানব থাকিবে ভঙ্গে দানব দলনি হয়ে উন্মাদিনী আর কি দানব থাকিবে ভঙ্গে সাজরে সন্তান হিন্দু মুসলমান সাজরে সন্তান হিন্দু মুসলমান থাকে থাকিবে প্রাণ না হয় যাইবে প্রাণ থাকে থাকিবে প্রাণ না হয় যাইবে প্রাণ ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে লইয়ে কৃপান হরে আগুয়ান লইয়ে কৃপান হরে আগুয়ান নিতে হয় মুকুন্দের প্রিয়রে সঙ্গে নিতে হয় মুকুন্দের প্রিয়রে সঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে ভয় কি মরণে রাখিতে সন্তানে মাতঙ্গি মেতেছে আজ সমর রঙ্গে